Man, guys, thank you for that. Well, as a church in this Christmas season, we've been kind of just taking a moment and considering the why behind Christmas. And the idea behind this is that if we have a deeper understanding of why Jesus came, like we know he's the reason for the season, and yet why did he come? The idea is if we understand and have a deep grasp of why he came, that would erupt in high celebration of him from the inside out. And so tonight, before we just move forward a little bit, we're just going to press pause for just a moment and turn our attention to God's word. And my hope, my prayer for us is that as we move away from this evening, we would genuinely celebrate Jesus well, and it would be because we have a better grasp on why he came to this earth. Why are we celebrating this? And I want to read just a few passages from John 1 that I think kind of guide us into this. If you have your Bible, you're welcome to turn there to John 1, but if not, it's on the screen. But in John 1, starting in verse 5, I read it with the kids. This is what it says. It says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And then in verse 6, it says, "There's a man that was sent from God whose name was John, and he came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light." So light and darkness, and it's like, what on earth is John talking about here? It reminds me of this season of parenting that I'm in, which basically is that my son starts to like Star Wars. It's kind of awesome, you know? If you have a son like I do, then maybe you are as blessed as I was. We're watching all the movies. We'll probably watch them again. And as he watched them for the first time, it's like I am watching it for the first time again. But obviously, if you know anything about Star Wars, then you know the theme of the light versus the dark is just alive and well in that whole thing. Visually, you can see it. And yeah, there it is. So like clearly, the way that the good guys are dressing versus the bad guys, there's something going on there, right? Good guys, it's also sort of light, sometimes explicitly white clothing, and then all the bad guys, good grief, it's all dark, and it's sometimes just, Darth Vader is just black from head to toe, and he's got little red and blue buttons, but it's mainly just all dark, right? It's not very subtle at all. And then so you have that picture, and then also you just have, they're always talking about literally the dark side, right? The dark side, and they're giving warnings like, be patient, Luke, or like, fear and aggression and anger, that leads to the dark side. Once you start down the dark side, it will consume you. And the bad guys aren't even being careful. They're like, let your hate consume you and come to the dark side. It's not subtle at all. It's just very explicitly this theme is alive and well. And there's just hundreds of examples of this in the world that we live in. Hundreds of books and movies or stories where this vague theme of the light versus the darkness, they put faces to it, and they put stories to it, and they put names to it so that we're able to see what they're meeting, what we're able to understand it. And that's all John is doing in chapter 1. He's saying something very simple, and the first thing, it's just simply that Jesus is the light. That Jesus is the light. So you got John the disciple, who's writing about John the Baptist, and so try and keep up there. It's a little confusing. But John, he's saying that John the Baptist, he came to be a witness, to testify about something, to point people to something, to the light. And he's talking about Jesus. John has different nicknames for Jesus. He calls, at the very beginning, he calls him the Word, like a capital W. That is a title that he's giving to Jesus, and that has all sorts of meaning tied to that. Here, he's calling, and he's referring him to the light. And in verse 5, you kind of see one of the main points behind him calling Jesus as the light. Look at verse 5. It says, the light, it shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That in its nature, when light steps into darkness, the light always overcomes the darkness. The light wins every time in its nature. And so John's communicating that, and then in verses 9 through 11, you just see some of the saddest verses in the entire Bible. Let's look at them together, starting in verse 9. He says, the true light, again, talking about Jesus, the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. And he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came, this is tragic, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. You see that? He came to his own, those who were made by him, those who were made for him, and yet his own people did not receive him. In the season of parenting that we're in with our younger kids, we're having to coach them through like how to open presents. And what I mean by that is, don't like zip through them like a bull in a china shop. You have to pause and say things like thank you and acknowledge them and look them in the eye like a human being, right? So you've got things like that, but then you've also got things like whenever they get a gift and they're kind of like not sure about it initially, like we're trying to say, hey, you still put on a good face and say thank you. Like there's an art of not rejecting the gift outwardly, even if you're not really sure inwardly. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe it's just us, but here, think about this with me. Imagine a child getting a gift, and that gift was carefully thought out. The person who picked it out, he picked it out specifically with them in mind. That gift cost a lot of money. That gift came from the other side of the world to get there. And the person was so excited to give this child that gift. They knew the child would enjoy it. They knew it was a good gift. And yet when the child opens the gift, just tosses it aside, complains immediately, is angry, even tosses it in the trash. You got that picture? That picture's the worst. It's terrible. It's very cringeworthy. And yet, John is saying that is what humanity has done with Jesus. Just tossed him aside. Namely, that it's in our darkness, we all have rejected the light. In our nature, in our darkness, we have rejected the light. What is this? What are we talking about? Again, this is vague, this is abstract. What are we talking about? We often talk about a statement by a man named Blaise Pascal here at CCC, and this is what it says. He says, there's a God-shaped hole in the heart of each person, which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator made known through Jesus Christ. So you see that, there's this, talk about this God-shaped hole in every single person in this room. So you combine this idea from Blaise Pascal with what John is talking about in John 1, what we're seeing is that the light, Jesus, who is true, the one that we were made by, the one whom we were made for, that the one who is the ultimate source of truth and morality and life and joy, purpose. John's saying that this light has come to us. He's stepped in and he's revealed himself to us. And that's what Christmas is all about, right? We're celebrating what John is going to say in verse 14, that the Word has become flesh and he's made his dwelling among us. This is the reason for the season, and yet, why did Jesus have to come in the first place? Because we as people, we had rejected God in our hearts. And how was Jesus received? He came to his own people, and his own people did not receive him. And so what I'm getting at is this, the rejection of God is the root issue of all my problems and all your problems. That either we, first and foremost, have forsaken God and gone and done life our own way, or someone else around us has, and we're kind of a casualty of them going their own way and forsaking God in their life. This is so important because in order for us to celebrate what Christmas is all about, the good news, we have to understand the bad news, that we have gone astray. But when you grasp that, the good news of Christmas is so sweet, because the good news of Christmas is that Christ has come to shine light on the darkness. He's come to shine light on the darkness. And as we close, what does that even mean? I want to give you two things. Is Jesus, first and foremost, he wants to shine light on our dark hearts. He's come to shine light on our hearts. And it reminds me of when we lived in Texas. And our house there, we had these terrible weeds. They're called sand spurs, I'm pretty sure. And I'm seeing some nodding of heads, and so we can have a little moment afterwards, this little counseling session, because it's a terrible situation if you know anything about it. Because the way it works, these sand spurs, they have this pointy tip that when you're mowing your grass, again, hypothetically, you're mowing your grass, they are stabbing you in the legs. But if you mow over those things, those pointy tips are the seeds for more weeds. And so if you just mow over it, and you're just like, I'm doing it, what you're actually doing is planting more weeds and just a bad headache the next day. And so what needed to happen with our lawn, when I've gone on blogs and figured out what to do, we had to kill our lawn. We had to get to the root issue. We had to literally kill it and then literally get a new lawn. The issue was that bad. It was so devastating. And hear me. That same devastation is in my life and in your life. When Jesus talks to us about following him, he says, come and deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. And so, whereas so many times when we look at like the various different expressions of weeds in my life and in your life, we often treat them like I did my lawn. We just kind of mow over it. We neglect the root issue. But John, in verse 12, he's talking about the root issue. He says, look at verse 12. He says, but to all who did receive him, that is Jesus, for all who receive Jesus, who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but born of God. So John is simply saying, he says, when you hear the good news of Jesus, and when you believe on his name, that his sacrifice on the cross is not just some abstract thing that you kind of nod your head to, but you apply it to your own heart and life. He says, when you do that, when you believe in him, you become, in his words, a child of God. What he's going to say in John 3, you become born again. And his light, it shines in your heart. And so let me just ask you, have you done that? Have you heard the good news of Jesus and have you responded to it by trusting in Jesus and applying it to your own heart and your life? What better thing could you do to celebrate Jesus this Christmas than to hear it for real and respond in faith and following him? What better thing you could do? So Jesus, he wants to shine light on our hearts, but then secondly, Jesus, he wants to shine light in our lives. Last Christmas Eve, I wasn't really on stage. Usually I was on stage even as the youth pastor. Kind of under the radar. We were sitting right back where Paul Goldstein is sitting right now. And because we literally the day before went to the ultrasound, and we got some very heavy, dark news regarding our son, David. Like literally, we were sitting back there and our world was completely shattered. Our boy, who we were we found out on a moment that it was a boy, and in that same moment, we found out something that was critically wrong. And sure enough, he had this genetic disorder that, as many of our church family who have just been so kind to us, and walking with us through this. It's called trisomy 18, and we held him for 9 hours. And we went to his grave today, which is sweet. I mention that because when Jesus shines his light in your heart, you're not immune from dark moments. You're not immune from dark seasons. But in John 8, look at what it says in John 8. Jesus, he has this moment where he says, I'm the light of the world. And he says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but he'll have the light of life. And hear me, when Jesus moves into our hearts, you have dark moments. You go through dark seasons. I don't have to preach that to many of you. I'm preaching to the choir on that one. And yet when Jesus moves in and shines his light in your hearts, you're able to see. You're able to see. You're able to have hope in those moments. You're able to have this light that is able to carry you through those dark moments. And you have hope. What's your story, man? What's your story? How do you need to respond?